Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Cattles.
Hey everybody, welcome back into the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast. Today is Friday before the Patriots take on the Titans. We are joined again and very appreciative that Greg Cosell, the executive, what are you now? The executive director?
I don't know, what am I?
Executive producer, analyst to NFL Matchup, NFL Films guru. He's a friend of the program, and the reason I brought him in again is because he does a hit every week with Outkick and the guys in Nashville.
It's not with Outkick.
Oh, okay.
It's with the radio station down in Nashville, and then I do a podcast with him as well called The Install.
That's right. I actually have that saved on my phone, and I listen to it.
That's good.
A lot of times. People should check that out. Then not only do they do a lot of on the Titans, but they go around the league and they hit on everything. So everybody should check that out. The podcast is called The Install with Greg Cosell. But Greg watches a lot of Titans for his gigs over there. And so we think this is a big matchup in AFC, but I don't know what kind of Titans team we're going to be out there. The injury report just came out. The Titans have ruled out, among others, A.J. Brown, and I'm just trying to call it up to make sure I get everybody, because there are some significant people on there. I'm having a little trouble with my internet in this hotel room, but let's see. Okay, here we go. So the Titans have ruled out A.J. Brown, guard Nate Davis, Rashaan Evans, very good linebacker, David Long, a very good linebacker, running back Jeremy McNichols, leaves them with two healthy running backs, Tayer Tart, a defensive lineman. They also, Jayon Brown, another good linebacker, is questionable. Greg Mabin, Elijah Molden, another good cornerback, Jeff Swaim, a good tight end, has been battling concussion issues, but he was full participant on Friday, so I would expect to see him out there. Greg,
that's a big list.
It is a big list, and of course the Patriots have 10 questionable, but I'm sure everybody's available because they are fully healthy right now. Greg, what kind of Titans team do you guess that we're going to see on Sunday? And I guess we can use the Texans game as a jumping off point. Everybody saw the loss and said, "Oh, this is horrible. They can't do this, they can't do that. Derrick Henry, blah blah blah." I don't know. I watched the film and I thought they were okay. I thought they were productive. I just thought that they had some really, really bad plays. And but just where do you think the Titans are at this point in time?
Well, right now the biggest issue for the Titans is their offense, because with all the injuries, they've really struggled to do two things, which are the way they play are very, very important, Greg. They do not run the ball very well at all right now. And in fact, they'll go with Dontrell Hilliard probably as their feature back. As you know, they cut Adrian Peterson. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, I actually watched the Titans offensive tape before they cut Peterson, and I made a note that Peterson at this point in his career is just running to get tackled. So I guess they saw that the same way because they obviously released him. But they can't run the ball, and over the last 3 games, they produced no explosive plays on offense. They've had 3 20-plus yard completions in the last 3 games. Wow. One was a screen. One was a quick slant to Marcus Johnson, who's also on IR and finished for the season, that he happened to run after catch to make it a big gain. And the third one was this past week against Houston, in which Houston busted the coverage. So they've really had no explosive pass plays. So when you look at an offense that can't run the ball and can't create explosive pass plays, you're going to struggle in this league. And one final point, and it's probably going to be true again this week. The 3 receivers who played the most snaps for them last week were Dez Fitzpatrick, a 4th-round pick who they cut and brought back, Chester Rogers, who's been around the league, and Nick Westbrook-Ahini. Those were the 3 receivers who played the most snaps, and given that Brown has now been ruled out, I would imagine that will be the case again.
Yeah, and I tell you the truth, I don't even really know who those guys are. And look, I was just typing a note for BSA about the injury report, and the Titans are probably going to have to go heavy on their practice squad. They have Cody Hollister, former Patriot,
Right.
Mason Kinsey, Austin Mack, and they signed Golden Tate this week. So not
Yep.
exactly running on full cylinders here.
No, so we'll see, but they have really struggled offensively. Their defense has actually been very good. There's nothing wrong with their defense. They did not lose last week because of their defense. Now, they have a lot of injuries there as well, clearly, but their defense, for the most part, has played extremely well, Greg. And their front with Jeffrey Simmons, Danico Autry, Landry, this has been a really, really good front. Simmons is a really outstanding player, one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL.
Without question. I mean, it's unbelievable, how much attention he gets, but also how many plays he makes. He's just dominating up front, and that'll be an interesting matchup. He'll probably get Shaq Mason a lot, and David Andrews should be a good matchup there. What kind of coverages and how much pressure do the Titans bring?
The Titans have not been a high pressure defense at all over this last. Well, they had the winning streak, obviously, that ended this past week, but they had not been a high percentage blitz team at all. Their MO in this winning streak has been 4-man pressure. And when they play nickel, they predominantly would play zone coverage. And when they played dime, they play a much higher percentage of man coverage. That has really been kind of their MO. I guess we'll see. The secondary seems to be okay. I mean, if you look overall, I think at this season, you'd probably say that they play a good mix, but they do have tendencies like every team. They're probably more of a single high based defense than a split safety based defense, but they do play a meaningful amount of two shell. So they're one of those defenses, and we're very conscious of this when we do pieces in the matchup show. So when someone plays against Tennessee, we pretty much say, oh, we can probably show an offensive play against pretty much any coverage, because Tennessee does kind of do that, but they are not a heavy blitz team at all.
How do you think they'll bother Mac Jones? Like we'll see Bill Belichick. I'm wondering if Vrabel is similar. I haven't studied him that much. I see him when he plays the Patriots, and he always does a good job. Will he try to take away, say, Hunter Henry from Mac Jones on third down in the red zone, or will they just play it more straight?
That's hard to know. I mean, obviously, Vrabel does have a Belichick background. I don't think that's what they normally do. But, I think it's important to start, and it's funny. I've been talking about that this week, and you're there, and you're closer to the Patriots than I am. And we know Mac Jones has played very well, given what he's been asked to do. But this is a running football team, Greg.
Yep.
I mean, you know that. I mean, if you add up Stevenson's carries and Harris's carries, they have more carries combined than Jonathan Taylor. This is a running football team, and they do it old school. They do it without the quarterback being a factor in the run game. They do it with the quarterback under center. Almost 85% of Harris's and Stevenson's rushes this year have come with Mac Jones under center. So they are old school. And I think that's what's been lost, because obviously everybody focuses on the quarterback, and deservedly so. Mac Jones has played extremely well, but they're not tossing the ball around the yard. This is not the way they play offense. And Mac Jones has been incredibly efficient in what they do. But it all starts for them with the run game.
Yeah, and that leads me into another question, and I had some lingering questions about the Patriots that I wanted to ask you, that if you had any opinion on them, including, so last week against the Falcons, Dean Pease seemed to get Mac a couple times on some pressures for a couple sacks.
Yep.
Are you at all alarmed about that, or is that just a typical rookie quarterback? He'll learn from it, that sort of thing.
Oh, I think he'll learn. Dean Pease has been doing this a long time. He was obviously in New England at one point. I think he's a master at showing something before the snap, and then what it looks like after the snap is different. He's been doing that his whole career. I think we've reached the point with Mac Jones where we just expect him to play like he's a 10-year veteran, and he's not a 10-year veteran. And there are going to be things that he just doesn't see as quickly as we kind of think he will see, just because for the most part he's played that way, Greg. But there are going to be things that he has shown that he's not quite seen, or it takes him an extra beat or two to really decipher it. And, in the NFL, if you have to wait an extra beat or two, it's a problem. So, they've done such a good job of, I'm talking about the coaches in New England, Coach Belichick, Coach McDaniels, of really controlling the situation for Mac Jones, that he's not really had to play in a lot of bad situations. And they've been able to really keep him from having to do that. So when he does sort of get stuck in the pocket, which doesn't happen very often, but it happened a few times in that game, as you mentioned, against Atlanta, we're surprised by it. But it happened, and it will happen again.
Yeah. Greg, you might find this interesting. But going into that game, because I keep my own stats and from the game film, and I had him responsible for only 1.5 pressures going into that game. I had him for 3 in that game, including 2 sacks. And I looked back, I think at the same point through 10 games, I think I had Cam Newton for 11 pressures, including 9 sacks. And in Brady's final year, I had him for 5 pressures that I put on the quarterback. So
Right.
Mac is in, and what you said about the running game and all that certainly helps. And they've certainly done a good job of setting Mac Jones up to succeed, which I think has been a standout part of this team. A couple other lingering questions I have on the defensive side of the ball. We've seen, and I'm sure you've noticed, the Patriots have played a lot of zone defense since Jonathan Jones went out. To compound the Stephon Gilmore trade, Jonathan Jones goes on IR. They played a lot of zone since then. My question is, how long can they continue to do that and play the way that they are defensively, which is really well of late?
Well, I think I kind of enjoy watching their defense, but you're right. They've played a lot more zone. And I think they'll do what Coach Belichick thinks is best. We know he's very opponent specific. Who knows? You could see him, because of the nature of the receivers this week that Tennessee puts out there, decide, you know what, this is a week I can play man. We don't know that, but you're exactly right. I think this defense is fascinating. And, there's a little bit of a trend in the league with teams. A lot of teams are playing essentially big nickel as their base defense.
Mm-hmm.
The Cowboys do it. Washington does it. But to me, Kyle Duggar and Adrian Phillips are so key to what this defense does, because of their multidimensional traits and their abilities, because they're essentially safeties who play linebacker. And they don't really get hurt badly by the run game. So, I think it's a really fascinating defense. But I would think that they'll continue to play zone if he's, depending on the opponent. They're certainly comfortable doing it. They still have a corner in J.C. Jackson who can line up against anybody, that I know they feel comfortable with him if they have to line him up and play man coverage. As you know, he's a very good man coverage defender. So we'll see. But you're right. Since Jones went out, they really haven't played as much man as, I always looked at the Patriots in recent years anyway as front multiplicity and coverage consistency. And the coverage consistency was they played a lot of man. Mm-hmm. And they did a lot with their fronts. That's always been a Bill Belichick thing. But that has not been quite the case as much this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we all know that pressure ties in with coverage. And I think that the Patriots have been able to get away with some of their coverages because the pressure's been so good of late from Barmore and many others. But specifically Matthew Judon, Greg, every week when I chart the games in my own sort of system, I have between 6 and 12 like impactful plays every single game. I don't think I've ever covered a defensive player, and I covered Jason Taylor when he was defensive player of the year. I covered Charles Woodson when he was defensive player of the year. The impact that he's had. How come teams aren't taking care of him every week, or are they trying to and he's just been that good?
Well, some of that has to do with what they do with their fronts, Greg, because sometimes you can set your front where it's very difficult to double team it. Now you can always double team with a back. Then it depends on the team and their philosophy, because a lot of teams, look, you and I both know that every offense would like to get 5 out. That's what you'd like to do. But sometimes you can't if you can't protect. I think there was a sense with Matthew Judon coming from where he came from in Baltimore that he was a piece of a really good defense that was highly schemed, and that while he put up some good numbers, that he wasn't necessarily just a pure edge pass rusher on his own, that he was a kind of a movable chess piece player, which is one reason why when Bill Belichick signed him, everybody said, what a great signing, because he was sort of that guy that you could line up anywhere, because we know that Coach Belichick likes those smart guys. I mean, look, he does that with Van Noy. He does that with Hightower. These are guys who move around an awful lot, particularly when they're in their dime sub package. There was a sense Judon was more that guy than, hey, let's line him up on the edge and rush the quarterback. He's become more of that guy this year, and apparently he's very good at it. But they still move a lot of players around. And over the last number of weeks, Barmore, another player who can line up in multiple positions across the defensive front, whether you're talking zero technique, one technique, two technique, three technique, 4-eye on the edge. He's another one of those players that can line up in multiple positions and be a factor as a pass rusher. So all of a sudden you're dealing with a defensive front that not only is multiple in its alignments, because that's always what Coach Belichick has wanted to do and has done, but now you have individual players who can win. And he didn't always have that. He always had to sort of manufacture pressure. Now he can still manufacture pressure, but he's got individuals who can win one-on-one.
Yeah, it's been a remarkable turnaround for this defense after a slow start this season, and certainly guys like Barmore and Judon and Kyle Van Noy's really come on in the past couple weeks. And like you said, Adrian Phillips is a guy that I think it took them a while to figure out how to deal with the three safeties between McCourty, Phillips, and Duggar. And Duggar, hey, you can tell he's playing faster now, and it makes them much more dynamic.
And
on
isn't
defense.
he's about 220, 225, isn't he?
He's a big dude. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, he is. Finally, let's finish up here, because obviously you watch the rest of the league, and the Patriots are going into the teeth of their schedule right now. How they do against the Titans and the Bills twice and the Colts coming up could determine whether they're the 1 seed or out of the playoffs. And so just wanted to sort of get your quick assessment on where some of these other AFC teams are that the Patriots will be jockeying for position, starting with the Colts, who seem to be coming on strong.
Well, the Colts have clearly established an offensive identity that now starts with Jonathan Taylor. Although Carson Wentz has played well, but he's in a good situation. They're very effective with play action, both in the gun and with Wentz under center. But there have been games where Wentz has not had to throw it a whole lot, in some ways like Mac Jones. And apparently their O-line is healthy. I saw that Quentin Nelson was a full participant in practice this week, so he's obviously good to go. So they are clearly built on their offensive line as the foundation, and Taylor, who's a really, really good back and is running better this year after a year in the league. You can just see that patience. A lot of backs just want to take the ball and go, but in the NFL, there's a very fine line and a balance that needs to be developed. And sometimes it takes time between patience and decisiveness. And that takes time. And I think Taylor has really found that now. He was my number one back coming out last year as a runner. And I think he's now playing to the traits that were very evident in college. The issue for them is potentially on defense, because they're playing with two backup safeties. And I think that's impacted the way they play on defense tactically. And they can be beaten. They're vulnerable. They're backup safeties. It's Odom and Sendejo, who seems like to me has been in the league for 30 years.
Yeah.
But but he's hanging around and he plays. If you look at the Bills, and obviously they played last evening, they're clearly trying to develop a running game that has value. They'll never be a high volume run team or a run first team, but they were getting stuck, which some teams do, in just throwing it too much. And it's not just the quarterback then who potentially has an issue. Their O-line is not good enough to throw the ball 40, 45 times a game by choice. It's just not good enough. And Josh Allen takes the brunt end of the criticism, and there's nothing wrong with Josh Allen. I mean, he's a really talented player. I personally think, Greg, he's the most physically gifted quarterback in the league. Now, that's a different statement than saying he's the best. But I
Right.
think he's the most physically gifted quarterback in the league, who
I
could
won't
become
argue
the
with
best.
that. Yeah.
What's that?
I won't argue with that. I
Yeah,
have some issues with Josh Allen, but I will not argue about
yeah.
how
I mean,
talented he is. I mean,
yeah. Like
he's
I said, I don't. I
yeah.
would say, if as we speak today, I wouldn't say he's the best quarterback in the league,
Yep.
but I think his physical gifts are off the charts.
Yes.
But so they're trying to really run the ball, and see and sort of make their offense more balanced. Obviously, the loss of Tre'Davious White is huge defensively for them,
Yeah.
and we'll see. I mean, White. It's interesting, as you probably know, they have not really used him as a matchup corner. He
Mhm.
plays boundary corner, and Wallace plays field corner. So it doesn't mean that they can't match up to teams, because that's not the way they use Tre'Davious White. But he was so good. He was such a good zone corner. He had such a great feel for routes, a great feel for, the term that Matt Bowen and I always talk about. He had a great feel for not covering grass, because you see too many defenders when they're playing zone. If things go away from them, they just stand there. Tre'Davious White had such a great feel for squeezing routes, for finding receivers even in zone. So that's a big loss for them.
Yeah. No question. A couple other teams, if we have time, that I wanted to ask you about: the Chiefs and the Ravens. It seems like the Chiefs are getting right, especially defensively.
Yeah.
They've been great of late, and we'll see if Mahomes gets all the way back. But where do you see the Chiefs and then the Ravens at this point?
Yeah, the Chiefs defense has played exceptionally well over the last 3-4 weeks. And that's a big deal, because offensively, I think they're working their way back. Mahomes had had become a player as gifted as he is, and he's a high level traits player as well, obviously. But he had started to play with too much unnecessary movement.
Hmm.
He started to play too much outside of structure. They're working him back with the way they're playing now. A lot more quick game throws, get the ball out, take what's there. I'm sure they'll start working now toward pushing the ball down the field a little bit more. But as you know, Greg, you can't live off second reaction outside of structure plays,
Yep.
no matter how good you are at those things. And Mahomes may well be the best in the league at that, but it's still too hard to do that. That can't be the foundation of an offense. And I think
Absolutely.
they realize that, and they're working to get him back on track, and he's getting there. And with the defense playing as well as I mean, their defense dominated Dallas a week ago, just dominated. Dallas couldn't run the ball. They got great pressure on Dak Prescott. So with the way their defense is playing, their offense can kind of work slowly back into being a really, really good offense again. And Baltimore's an interesting team. I know they win, and obviously there's something there that's good, but they're a tough team for me to evaluate. Um,
Hmm.
I still don't know if their pass game is high level. Their defense is not been as good this year overall as it's been in years past. So yes, they win, but I'm very curious to see where they go. Lamar Jackson will obviously be back this week. He's
Hmm.
still the most dynamic running threat at the quarterback position in the league, and I think they'll probably do a lot of that. He throws it better, but I still wouldn't say that they're a team that is a passing team. So it's like I said, they're a tough team for me to evaluate.
Yeah. They are going to be interesting to watch. It's going to be interesting to watch down the stretch in the AFC what happens, because it seems like the Patriots, Colts, and Chiefs are all peaking at the right time, but there's still a lot of football left
Oh, there's
to
I
be
know that
played.
that one extra game, Greg, seems to me like 5 extra games.
I know it's
You
it's
know,
unbelievable. I keep telling people, I'm like, this year I can't tell. I said, talk to me like December 19th when there's
right?
4 games
Exactly.
left. Then we'll sort of know. But Greg, I can't thank you enough for doing this. The Zara, the Telestrator, and everything else. Make sure you guys check out NFL Matchup if you're not already doing that. Check out Greg's podcast out of Nashville with those guys. A ton of good information. Greg, thanks so much. Hope you and your family had a great Thanksgiving. And we'll check in with you down the road as we get rolling into the playoffs.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.
Thank you.